I'm on Gadigal land and give thanks to the elders past, present and emerging for their ongoing role as teachers and knowledge holders of this land. Today I'm speaking about disability, a word that does not exist in many First Nation languages and where disability is seen as an integrated part of human experience. Thank you, Angela, for your wonderful presentation and the important research and practice insights. I found myself nodding along with you. You couldn't see me, but I was nodding along with you because I think there's some parallels in some of the things that I'm going to say. I'll be presenting about Layla, a 9-year-old girl who loves slime and playing. She's had a traumatic past, having fled Iraq, and along with this, a diagnosis of intellectual disability and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD. I thank her family who've given permission to talk about her, and I've changed names in some aspects of this presentation to ensure their anonymity. You might be wondering, as you look at that picture of slime, and I hope I haven't triggered anyone in that process, but you might be wondering what slime has to do with supporting Layla and her family. On reflecting on my work with Layla and her love of slime, the analogy of slime helped me to consider some of the challenges that presented along this client's journey. Now, for those in the know, slime is made from a mixture of a particular type of glue, some specific ingredients that activate the glue to become a medium that has lovely sensory qualities. It's fun to play with, and it's really something that you experience, that you feel. There are many different ways to make slime, and getting the recipe right for slime requires careful measurement of specific ingredients. It can be slimy, it can be foaming, it can be all sorts of qualities. But and this might be that we adapt the recipe to desired qualities of the slime. We need to have the right containers and places in which to use it. And we also need to ensure that we have rules and boundaries around its use, but more about slime later. Layla was referred to me for behaviour and developmental concerns and had been seen previously by other STARTS counsellors. She was diagnosed with ADHD and intellectual disability. She was born in Iraq and arrived in Australia in 2016. Her family are Assyrian. At home, mainly Assyrian was spoken, although her parents can speak Arabic and Chaldean. Her family are Christian. I initially used an interpreter with Layla, although she rarely spoke, and when she did, she preferred to use English. I first met her when she was 7 and attending a mainstream school. She currently attends a support class located within a mainstream school. Layla lives with her mother and father. Her mother's parents and sisters also live in Australia. There was no information given about her father's family. At the time of referral, Layla was 7 and her older brother 9. The intensity of trauma that Layla experienced is unknown. Her mother felt that there were no early developmental concerns for Layla, but Layla's mum found it difficult to talk about these experiences. She said that they'd left Iraq when missiles killed some of their neighbours. There were periods of time where it was challenging as they stayed in churches and tents. There were periods in Lebanon, it was very difficult and hard to find work. The family resettled in Australia when Layla was 3. While here, she moved house 4 times and has been to 3 different schools in the last 5 years. It's important to consider the impact of these traumatic experiences, particularly in relation to her implicit memory, as Layla would have been at a pre-verbal stage of development during the ISIS attacks in Iraq. Implicit memories such as these are experienced by a young child within the body, so there's no connection to what has happened or the words or stories that go along with it to explain it. It's also important to consider the relational development of her as a young child and the influence of significant maternal deprivation, family stress, and trauma for the parents, and the impacts that this might have on attachment formation. These challenges would also impact on the ability of her parents to provide a secure base for her and to provide containment for her and her brother. Oroch and Coelho state that there's a complex interaction of challenges between traumatic experiences, resettlement issues along the way, along with the normal life cycle challenges that occur, and that these occur in the context of the international events and the recovery environment within Australia. When we would consider the complex interaction of these challenges, we need to also understand that there's an added layer when there's disability. There will still be normal life cycle challenges, but it may look quite different to how the family thought it would be as they come to understand the impact of disability on their daughter at different stages and accept this difference. Their cultural transition and settlement needs will also have added layers of complexity as they try to navigate services and supports for their daughter that they may never have had access to in their home country. They may also have to understand a different way of viewing disability from that of their own culture, as the frameworks that govern how disability services are accessed and used depend upon this understanding. It is essential to consider different cultural attitudes towards disability, and the table in this slide considers how we might see how this might play out in communities that we work with. For some cultures, there may be shame, guilt, or stigma associated with disability, and how these can impact on the expectations they have of people with disability and how they might then in turn access and engage with services. Particularly significant will be the different reasons used to explain, attribute, and give meaning to their difficulties. Layla's family understood Layla's difficulties as something medical, that medicine and therapy available in Australia would fix. This meant that there was often a focus on the provisions of things that would fix the situation, and that Layla was something to be fixed, rather than understanding the role of therapy and support that Layla could have to help her to develop the skills she would need to reduce the impact of her difficulties on her future participation within society. Layla presented an initial assessment with a number of problems. Her behaviours at home were difficult for her parents to manage, often relating to managing her anger, throwing things and destroying property. She was unable to sleep by herself and had difficulty falling asleep. She was not eating well. There was occasional soiling and wetting, and she was quiet at school. But even so, most of the time she was quiet, there were periods of difficult behaviour, such as hitting other children and throwing chairs. But she also wasn't learning, and there was a need for her to have an educational assessment. She was often hypervigilant at school and had poor attention, and there was language delay not associated specifically with her in the process of learning English. Layla did have many strengths, and some of these included that she had a real love of animals and she cared for them deeply. She was good at problem solving and would often use this to get what she needed. She liked playing and art, and she liked order and organisation, and this actually helped her with her poor attention skills. Layla's family wanted the best for their daughter. They liked being in Australia and learning English and getting work. Layla's support systems, the school and other services, did want to do the best for Layla, but weren't always sure what that meant. Layla did have access to an NDIS plan, and the assessments were done to facilitate school placement and therefore more support for Layla. Our first session, Layla walked in the room. She was very thin, not making eye contact nor smiling. I was not the first STARTS counsellor to work with her. She knew that they bought toys and was very inquisitive about what toys and activities I had brought. She flitted from one activity to another, but was not really settling. She asked if we could make slime, and we agreed that we'd do that the following week. At the second session, I kept all the toys the same to give some consistency to the play space, but also bought the ingredients to make slime, as I wanted to see if giving her what she felt she needed would increase her connection and engagement. I'd Googled the ingredients, consulted with a 12-year-old friend and slime expert about how to make it, I was ready. We set out the ingredients, Layla making sure everything was in the right place. We added the ingredients, and although she didn't like the rules we'd set around who does what, she was keen for the outcome. We put them together, and then nothing happened. Nothing at all. Layla did not speak, but rolled her eyes at me, crossed her arms, and turned her back on me. It felt like hours. The interpreter and I looked at each other. Eventually she spoke, told us we were bad slime makers, and went to play. This was on me. A critical ingredient in the slime was missing. The next week we had the right ingredients and there was slime, and it was the beginning of our play sessions. And in these early play sessions, Layla showed me some of these things. She showed me she didn't feel safe, that she wasn't comfortable in making mistakes, even if someone else made them, that she wanted to gain control, that she did find it difficult when boundaries were set, but that she was able to respond to limit setting when limits were set for her. Reflections on these early sessions made me consider what were the right ingredients for working with Layla, but also the systems supporting her. There were many challenges to providing holistic support, and some of these I think Angela has really highlighted in her presentation as well. There was limited multidisciplinary collaboration. The school environment was still getting to know her and working out how best to support her. That getting the right NDIS support was quite challenging. At the initial stages of being involved with her family, there was a lack of support coordination in her plan. There was inadequate, and the plans themselves, the plan itself from the NDIS was had limited funds for the types of therapy she needed. Interpreters were not consistently used by service providers, and that some service providers didn't understand some of the language and cultural needs that this family might have, or consider what refugee trauma might impact on their engagement. And while the NDIA was suggesting access to mainstream services, there was no acknowledgement that of the difficulty this family had in actually accessing these mainstream supports. The parents also had experiences that were impacting on providing a holistic support. Their understanding of disability and the role of NDIS and their reliance on the medical model certainly impacted. Parents' own experience of refugee trauma and loss meant that it was very difficult for them to trust people, and it impacted on them feeling comfortable in accessing services. In terms of goals, we had particular goals around facilitating a positive recovery environment. That what we could do for Layla wasn't just related to Layla herself, but was very important to include a systemic approach, and that this required much collaboration. So there were goals around development of relationship with her mother, with Layla's mother, looking at connecting services and collaborating between services to build the capacity of her class teacher and school to support Layla and her family, and supporting culturally responsive and trauma-informed services that were going to wrap around this family. For clarity of this case story, I'd like to stay focused on some of the outcomes that were addressed in the systemic approach before moving on to the specifics of the individual play therapy work I did with Layla. But it does need to be acknowledged that this process happened over time. Supporting Layla's family was an important part of supporting Layla. Her mother was often overwhelmed, and initially her response was not to answer the phone. COVID lockdowns were also a challenging time for them. The development of trust took time before she felt comfortable to discuss issues, articulate decisions about services for her child, or attempt something new. Psychoeducation and telehealth were offered. It was really important to meet Layla's mother where she was at and to develop the relationship at a pace she was comfortable with. Other supports from STARTS were also offered, and she did start counselling herself, but chose not to continue due to her increasing opportunities for paid work. We made changes to the medical services she was getting, and the private paediatrician was very supportive in helping this family move over to a public service where collaboration was able to take place and the sharing of information to best support and coordinate services occurred. This ensured issues relating to her medication, her behaviour, diet and health were also looked at from a holistic perspective. The NDIS service uptake took time, and we needed to help move the family away from the concept of support workers taking over the role of caring for Layla to one where service providers assist in the development of Layla's skills. Understanding of how the refugee experience impacts on the ability to trust and the confidence she has, and along with the use of interpreters, was something that was, continued to develop. Initially, when Layla's mum was overwhelmed with the number of services, she initially asked for services to be at school. But as time went on, we advocated for more funding within her NDIS plan, particularly in relation to accessing a behaviour specialist who spoke the same language to provide home visits to access the support needed to help this family with Layla's behaviour at home. Other support was around assisting services to understand how they might need to work with Layla and her family in relation to language and cultural considerations. At her previous school, some of the supports given were about providing training to the whole school staff around the refugee experience and the impact of trauma in the classroom. At her new school and support class, I worked with the class teacher to build the capacity about the best way to support the engagement of Layla's mother with the school and increase their capacity to understand Layla's needs. With structure and routine in the classroom and an understanding of her needs, the behaviours in the classroom reduced significantly. We can see from Mum's goals that she had a focus on fixing the behaviours that were problematic at home, and this is understandably so. I imagine many of the parents in the room would be thinking that also. There was much discussion about the steps involved in changing this situation and responding to Layla's needs. Many suggestions and discussions about goals were provided, but much more support was needed. She at times really wanted to work on this, but was also overwhelmed with caring for both her children, managing the supports for Layla, working and also meeting her own needs. Layla's mum asked for the individual therapy to continue, and the following goals were associated with Layla's individual therapy. And they initially focused on creating safety and providing an attuned and this safety was provided through a consistent and predictable play space and an attuned relationship with myself, where I was trying to respond to the needs that she was expressing. To provide a space to express emotions and have these reflected back in that counselling space. To reprocess or provide opportunities to process traumatic experiences through play. And that might have been through implicit memories or stories that she's heard from her family. To experience boundaries and therapeutic limit setting, and to work with Layla's mum to transfer learning from the play therapy into home life. You might be wondering why I chose to use play. This quote from Oaklander gives a clear rationale of why play is so important for children. I'm going to focus on the last part of this while you read the rest, and that is play is the child's form of self-therapy through which confusions, anxieties and conflicts are often worked through. Play serves as a language for the child, a symbolism that substitutes for words. So given Layla's speech difficulties and the fact that her traumatic experiences were not necessarily associated with words, play therapy offered a way to play out what she needed to. And I think to actually connect with her wherever she was at. Engaging in play therapy allowed Layla to develop a sense of safety, to express positive and negative emotions through play, to feel in control. to reprocess and make sense of implicit memory, to project feelings, particularly for her around being different and of feeling excluded. But I also, going back to the last point around implicit memory, she was able to play through play enactment. She played out some of the things she might have seen or heard or felt of flight, of arrests and police, of caring for babies in the context of not having food, and of death and loss. So quite powerful things for her. She was able to make mistakes and still feel good enough in this space, and she learnt boundaries and responded well to limit setting. One of our last sessions, Layla decided she wanted to make slime. She remembered the day that slime didn't work and how angry she felt. Together, we set up organising the slime ingredients, and we shared this activity together. She no longer needed to be in control. The slime worked. She smiled and we played with slime. It wasn't how either of us actually liked our particular way of making slime, but we looked at each other and we still smiled. She looked at the last of the glue in the bottle and then at the containers we had and the various slime ingredients. She appeared not to need to do the same thing or to use all the ingredients as they were. She contemplated our recipe and what she liked. She said to me, "Do you think we could make a different type of slime? I want to make some for my mum." I saw this, I used this as a way of showing some of the changes in her mastery. There were definitely changes in other aspects of her play and in her life. So there was no more soiling or wetting. In terms of her play, she moved from being quite disorganised and needing sensory and messy play and being quite chaotic to much more organised, shared play or even cooperative symbolic play. There was improved attention and much more focused engagement, particularly when she was making art. She was able, I think, to a certain extent, make sense of some of her own and her family's experiences. She developed a sense of her own capacity and a positive sense of self, of what she might be good at, that there were much more pro-social behaviours at school, and that she was actually excited about learning at school. It's not to say that Layla's difficulties had completely gone, but rather she was ready for different experiences. She was settled at school and getting the right support, and her supports will continue. Thank you again to the family who allowed me to speak about their child.